leja de hindi ki pe daur ra ne chi ko na sik ma ko chi ko na changa hindi e be shuru di le ma lo na ha ko ma ra te la zam ta chi cha chi ra ta bo leja lo khu de ta ra ru di hindi te ne ini pe ta ta khu mu no es ka le ko che sa leja de chu ju ina pe le de ma ko be chang kesi kirang yung una kora na che de ma chungsa de leja ka la ta karan pe le ma de leja jangi leja ka shiwa chigi sam leja ya po jan.
So then if you have the thought that you want to learn it in the source language itself, then you need to be fluent in the source language, have a perfect grasp of that language. Then maybe it might make sense, the teachings. But it's very difficult if you do not have such a fluency and such a perfect grasp of the language. For example, I have a text, the Bodhicharya Avatara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And it's a multilingual text wherein there's the Sanskrit, the Hindi, the Tibetan, and the English. And even when from the what little Sanskrit that I have studied and what little grasp that I have over the Hindi, when I try to make sense of the Sanskrit itself, then it's very difficult. You have to kind of relate it to each other for it to make sense. I have a friend who studied in the Central University of Central University of Tibetan Studies, and he did his PhD in linguistics. And he approaches the study of Buddhism through the lens of modern linguistics. And one of the biggest problems he says that they face is because most of the text in Sanskrit does not survive today. Many of the actual text does not survive to this day. Yeah, it only exists in Tibetan. And some exist in Mandarin, Chinese, even older than the Tibetan ones. But the actual Pali and Sanskrit source text itself does not survive to this day. And then there are auto-commentaries by the masters on their root text. These are helpful, but in most cases there are no auto-commentaries. And then you have to refer to commentaries written in a different time, in a different language.
So if one is not a Buddhist, you have never studied any Buddhism, but learned Sanskrit well, there is absolutely no need of any commentary in any teacher, because one can learn Tibetan, and it renders Tibetan commentators kind of useless.
Wait, I didn't get that. Yeah. If one is not a Buddhist and one has not studied Buddhism at all,
but one is fluent in Sanskrit.
This is very rare. Even if you go to Varanasi, what we Buddhists call non-Buddhist schools of thought, there are many pundits, as they are called, who debate about the kind of old tenets. Yeah. And they say that it's very difficult to make sense of it without referring to later works which begins to expound on these.
And teachers.
Yes?
And teachers.
Teachers what?
Can one just learn the language, just the words?
And then study it on your own?
Yeah.
This is very difficult, I think.
Yeah. And understand, even if you understand the words, can one understand the context without a teacher and commentary?
This is very difficult, I think. Even my uncle, whose main work was the definitive and interpretive meanings, Chezongkapas. So when he took that project, now it's still it started in the 70s and it's still ongoing. And so he had now the main Sanskrit Pandit that he was referring to. He said he's well versed in Sanskrit, and he says some of the translations even better than what survives in the original text. It's explained better in the translations, in the later translations in Tibetan. And then the opposite is true too. Some of the things which are not so clear in the translations are more clear in the... But the problem is, as we already said, many of these texts do not survive.
Many of these texts do not survive, and as I understood, not only that it's very hard to understand only the root text, the commentaries used to elucidate it, and the commentaries are also given oral commentaries, for example. to elucidate. So without that two other additional layers which exist in Tibetan language, it's very, very hard to get in the gist of the meaning of the Sanskrit, correct?
It's quite difficult, I think.
Yeah.
Sanskrit as a language is very difficult.
Yeah.
It's not a normal language. Tanda di la gerda pyi the nangchuda ani karsa pyi kurang rang la ra ani jambat na chime ani in the Sanskrit chokdo juwa yo nasra ni nambe tenju da dodo zora susurangi pa tona lo nasra kowa ni ragi ra yasra dita pe khabara pa deba da zula ma da rangje da ani dizu deba da zula ma da na khabara ta kangi shishu de ni tsawa da zo bet kei kurang mage kurang na la tanda thonga yo mara je yo mara shira 가시 가시다 열다 게다 전부도 주다 열어 이제 내가 전부 단단한 저 세만남적이도 주다 뭐지 제면다 말에 리우 가시다 제열아 리우 가시 제면도 라이다 다니만 바 미라다 되는 뭐 제라 로직이 보주도 없어
네 단단한 저기 가지된 주주차네 그 저방 바다 살아 야간 누에 질는 누에 네 पर मुगला है तन्ना गाने तो शुरू तो पेश कोरोना आले मारा है जरा
So then as all these traditional seats of learning in India they got attacked they got razed to the ground then many of this root text in the original language got destroyed so the Tibetans came at the right time to take the Dharma to Tibet and then it survived in that translation
나는 또야도 좀 취처럼 그거 막 달차니 이도 근데 디퍼를 뭐니 라이트
So 11th century when like many of this what we call the Gajur and Tenjur the translation of the Buddha's teachings and the subsequent commentaries by the masters when the Tibetans undertook the first initiative the first round of translation then it was already like 11th century So by the 12th, 13th, 14th century, then these institutions, these traditional institutions of Buddhism begin to be attacked. So in that time period, many of the texts were lost. It's said when Nalanda burned, it burned for like a week or two.
Also, Laming journal is relatively approachable. Many metaphors, many examples. Philosophical texts are completely different.
Yes.
Hard to understand.
Yes. Lamrim does the tap the order begin to the trouble of Yomara. The Pataru Kurang, Semo Kurang, Taru de Matuna, the Chapashi will say Shijabara is the troubleshooter. This is the Kaburira, the Kurangi, the Shina, Bakora.
시거든 시거든 그거 사마기야 별로시나 나치 시비 잡아요 말아 다 단다 콘도로는 저기 메제이네 나치를 저기 장아야로 주야로 다 괜찮은 신고로 인지 야포신이지는 나치지는 주동만 달라는 거 나치로 나다 되게 되지라 그거라 오늘 대체보다 맞아 이마디 얘기 처음들은 인지 야포였대 지질라는 같이 듣는 레이더 그저기 게 이바장이 되게
So then just having a grasp or being fluent in one language, it's very difficult to get an understanding of the Dharma. For example, all the Tibetans read Tibetan. Then if you ask Tibetans to explain the text, it's very difficult. And for example, even if you have a good grasp of English and you speak perfect Tibetan, then if you're asked to translate without a grounding in Buddhist training itself and study, then it's a little bit difficult. So then it depends on the context, context in which one engages the intelligence. For example, we are used to the Buddhist teachings. So when we read the root text in the Buddhist teachings, then it makes sense for us. We have no trouble. But when we read the newspapers, then it's a little bit difficult to understand all the information at one go. But where else there are old people who read the newspaper every day, it makes perfect sense for them. But when they are asked to read the root text, it doesn't make any sense to them. So then just a fluency over the language does not guarantee an understanding of the teachings.
Talking about philosophical text, can Geshe-la please elucidate a little bit, because we had a little of discussions. Why is realization of emptiness, realization of substance so essential for liberation? Why not, for example, only single point meditation or anything else?
Tanda nganzo ni drupta kurang taru kurang gi mo ne ni nganzo ita cheba chebo la jora pena chena dikona ni tomba ni la ita dra cheba chebo res pa chema kurang gi cheme namsha ne pa cheba chebo res tila ni toba la ne da kodo roji kore la yora na chuna di kechem bu karchan sigi res na chuna
tomba ni pa di
dikona ni tomba ni ra tila cheba chebo de zan nganzo drupta taru kurang la pa cheba chebo ra 디게 니 고아도지 고에베 개침부레스라는 주는 냠nenza 마이바 디 가르장 개침부지 요레스 맨날 셔셔나 만족이다 로츠직나 내야 돼서다
베네치랑이 동반이는 지지 냠바 샤게일라나 담 또니 거를 간대지리라 가샤 간대를 때에 계속 두는 간대 두도 정말 아마고 아도니 검검 레미 좀 되네 디마라 근데 동반이 학과는 아니 동반이는 저기 그래 가서 싱가포르는 지도구로 제라 이내 담보디 거를 넣는 간대지리 있다 그 상담 그러면서 장주생 공일은 장주생은 간대에 미치 하면 다 되는 되고 장주생의 간대를 해야 가는 간대지 주가를 제가 하고 다디가 냠이 지기는 제가 근데 더더라
So practice as well as the wisdom aspect of it should inform each other. So if you say that you want to meditate on emptiness, and then you don't know what is emptiness, what is the basis of negation, what emptiness really means. Without a philosophical investigation into emptiness, how are you going to meditate on emptiness? And how are you going to single-pointedly meditate on emptiness? Doesn't make sense. So likewise, when you say you want to practice bodhicitta, then if you don't know what bodhicitta is, what are its benefits, what are the conditions and causes which gives rise to such a state of mind, then how are you going to practice bodhicitta? It doesn't make sense. So yeah, contemplation.
이치라는 배는 지금 뭐냐 뭔가 근질에 찾아라 내 근육 수준나라 근육 점자 당하더라 동반이 공주 아সম도 그라 어쨌든 나도 뭔가 지시로 장치를 뭐 아니 야 동반이 지 공주아서 잠깐만 지 공주 당하서 시간 공시면 갖고 있었다 이게 무슨 되더라고 근데 되게 다 단단히는 곰난 지편도 또 배는 사실 생편도 제도도 지금 요새는 지금 삼 테스트예요 제가 다시 와 그라 settelala jo medi de gomem one ting mara nyang mi chen chi tara chana le yemi ha kandan ni ma ku ni de so la ma de ta cha to ma yi gomja yin jin do shaju sen ju gomja de shaju sen sen de kande ji ni ji ha ma ma a to ju me sama mi som jam to ko kare gomu ya ta ma tu de na sha mi de ba ro ba de mu je de gemu ro she de de she ba de mo de so so de chonyu da
So I can relate to this question because it's just not you who had such questions. Because when we first began to receive teachings by the Dalai Lama in public gatherings, we were very young and we had no idea what emptiness is or what bodhicitta is. So then when the Dalai Lama used to give these instructions to the general public to now meditate on emptiness, now meditate on bodhicitta, and everybody else is very silent, meditating on these things, but we had no idea what it is. Nothing appears in our mind. We had no basis upon which we can try to contemplate on these things. So what we do is tease each other at that time. So without a basis upon without a foundational basis, then how are you going to meditate and practice these things? So it comes from that
단단한 레이더 대바메고 공부 라는 차나 근데 그 있어라. 이만 가서 대내 얘기들 나는 상당히 배도 카트도 칼레나 대바메네 가서 경험체를 ting다. 아니 이미 대바죠 무슨 경험체를 경험체색이 시디에 때들라니 말이야. 가는 저 하고.
So then it kind of reminds us of these kind of questions that we have kind of reminds us of the importance of these short and concise instructions from the sutras, wherein it begins to say that, as we already discussed, that meditating without hearing or listening or study and contemplation is like trying to climb a rock mountain without your limbs. So immediately when we hear such instructions, then we begin to ask ourselves, without study, we can actually begin to practice stabilizing meditations, wherein we can try to concentrate on a thing. But then when you actually try to do these things, then you face a lot of problems because you do not have the foundational understanding or the foundational instructions with which you can cultivate such a practice. So yeah, it's important to not remember the words themselves, but try to apply it to like your own experiences, your own kind of difficulties that you face. Then it begins to make sense.
I just wanted to know what does sin imply in Buddhist tradition?
What is
sin?
sin?
Is it like, because if it was the non-virtues, it would have been called sin, no? So
No, we wouldn't call it sin to avoid the connotation in the Christian sense of the word, but we would use the word non-virtue.
It's the same as sin.
Not sin in the Christian sense of the word. Okay, so pap, what is that in Hindi? What's the equivalent of pap in English? Okay. Tati dawa isara. Ine sin lamna inji namna thiyogna ta jurna era. Non virtue laide da nganza jursha era. Ine sin laide karchan pechu tangi yo mara lai chara. Mane china sin laide ta pechu tangna digra. Ine ta yishu gi chue namna sin lana yang kanzo tada dis tawa chabu dochita sin laide. Chema tawdo chiram diba chinji re la vedo. Digi tiwa dochita shukchen boda. Cheza inji na juru yonde zamba non virtue laide jure ta dochita.
Sometimes they translate it unskillful actions.
Yeah, that's just stretching it. Yes.
But it is not guilt feeling there.
Yeah, so that's the kind of care that the translators took to translate it as non-virtue rather than sin. That's, I think, from my perspective.
I don't know if I'm reading too much into your question, but beyond the word sin and non-virtuous actions, is there what's different between the Christian?
In Christian, maybe someone from the Christian background could attest to that.
Sin is something forbidden, right? It's like you're forbidden from doing.
Right.
No, the concept of sin in Judaism and Christianity is the fact that you will be punished by God.
It's always in front of a higher being, and it implies a feeling of guilt because the God is perfect and we are so so sinful in front of such a perfect being, so we have a feeling of guilt. This is in all monotheistic cultures, and
Potentially, but I think the point is that you're being punished by God when there is no God in Buddhism. So this is why it makes sense to me that it's not a sin.
and
It's a different
in Buddhism, the point is that they're taking responsibility.
Exactly. So when we use the word virtue, then we think, what do we associate the word virtue with? A benefit for ourselves. And then when we say non-virtue, then the negative consequences. So it's attaching it to a personal responsibility over one's own action, thoughts. It's not someone else who decides it's good for you or bad. It's your own actions, and it's the consequence of that actions that ripens in you. So, clear?
Yeah.
디발아 저라 간소 인진나나 sin lam나 줄나 디기어라 디다 님 non virtue para cheba 가려스 땅간소 인지 줄니 상막이 sin 나 배주 당기요 말 가르자나 이슈기 추나나 sin 나 배주 당기도 봤어 네 지든 거고 되니게 다 sin lam나 디발은 군족이 출라다 마직든 거 보게 출라 녀바 cheba 땅 녀바 자요 그래서 어디라도 좀다 군족이 출라봐 녀바 땅저로 고아식 청보다 디는 군주 셈나다 메데와 숙청보여서 디 이라 군주 차롱 주다 제자니 다 딜라도 좀뭐 추랑기 레 상보 가르사죠 녀바 가르사죠 디 소소기 타초기로 해라 군주 제자 디다 미데와레스다 게라도 좀뭐 페베 싸무지라 미게와라는 내바지라 어디 간서 이 주토와 버레스 신라도 좀뭐 파브르다 이슈기 서로 파 숙청보다 제자 간서 이 칙디 게 미게라 타가라나 추시라 아니 게라디 virtue 미게라디 아니 non virtue 타라샤 디지
그냥 좀저 이제 이슈 하고 얘기라 말아 정말 신의 개념 뭐더라 대표는 아주 이래라 와 이슈 지는 당아도 created god 참만 공주 수에다 그라 다 수기 직 두제 주는 내년 발산에 공주 수에다 다 아주 내년 얘기 뜻은 진라 쓰고 세 엔트라는 치나 다 리버죠 뒤에 공주 수에다
디 콘솔 제와지 그
다 공주 어디
So then Geshe-ma wants to ask a question regarding the Judeo-Christian conception of sin. So when we say that the God decides whether you have committed a sin or not, then since God has created you, then it should entail that whatever sin that you commit comes from the act of that creation itself, and whatever virtuous things, for lack of a better word in this context, whatever good things, let's say, you do should come as a consequence of that creation itself. So then both sin and non-sin, let's say, not sin and non-sin, is it explained that God himself created both sin and non-sin?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. It's not exactly the same, I think, in Judaism and Christianity. In Christianity, like Catholicism, for example, everyone is born a sinner, and you need to work your entire life to become I don't know what's the word, but a good person and
repent.
Sure. In Judaism, I think it's a little bit different. That people are being considered a bit more pure. And even though God created sin, I think it's still like it's still a choice that you make, a conscious choice to make if you're sinful or not.
Tadi niyoresra. Tanda Yishu Kurang chunala ni tisloga tagires. Ni Yahude chuyra. Yahude chunala tisloga tagires. Ni Kurang nilada pyumungi chamambu yonayan dela tismidrados. Ni Seburang lashing mesra. Ni da Kurang kodola chinas. Yishu ki chunala chu chematado dibachin resta. Jigdinala ma chematado yora dibachin res. Taki chematado dibachin ina ta mezi ganga yora. Ni joba che diksha che ro yora da. Diksha la ta joba che ne. Ni ta yang da ba chi cha bres. Kunjo gi da kozo ka ro yora. Ji odi la sung ne ni yang da ba ro chi cha bres. Ta kunzo yang yaude chena la chena sra tinderang la gi mares. Chemata da diba chen la de da la gi ayo ma yres. Ni kunjo gi chu tun jang sra. Ni yang churang gi le ge mi gi la jora. De la ju ma ju di so so rang ge ni gen chi yu ba ro ji shi gi res.
나 이슈기가 당초 취역을 지발라 취역. 근데 이슈기 그냥 지만 다들 디바진지 지어래라나. 라. 근데 디바진은 건조가 쓰죠. 라. 건조기 근데 디바진 가르치는. 라. 다디 이게 다 같이 막아 되면 나라 도발 우리. 라. 수디 시에 뺏기 좀더라. 직접 가서 시에 뺏기 좀.
So since
건조라는 동네 가서 배 아버라 지나 초도 줘 봐. 건조선이 상마 신이 라. 건조 드니스케네 이거지.
레지는 거
이러고 가는 참 야도 정말 신이지라. 신이지기 내리까지 제일 가르치는.
So then the question arises, since now we are engaging in a spiritual exchange of opinions, so for those of us who are from the Christian background, then
correct a little bit, add to Christian.
then maybe we have this question first from Geshe-ma, and then he opens up the discussion furthermore. So then, this is not to say that I'm criticizing the Christian way of thinking, but it's a genuine question I have. When you say everything comes from creation, then the Creator is an omniscient being who knows everything, the consequence, future, everything. So then why would, if you are born a sinner, why would the Creator create such a sinner in the first place?
It wasn't like that. The Christians, I can't speak for Judaism, but Christians have the discussion about the origin of sin.
The original sin.
Origin of sin. By fallen angel. First, there were
Adam and
before that. First, there were just angels which were all good around God, and they had free will. And by the power of free will, one of the angels and then some consequently decided to rebel against God. And this is then the origin. So it is not that God is, from that perspective, still pure love, but because of the free will of the angel and human beings and so on, one can decide, would one be on the side of the good ones or the bad ones, but at the end it is still logically inconsistent.
So, 건조기 당이 this 세버선이 주선스 여우대 출라도 라시기 메스라기네 이슈비 채널에 딕발라야디 제마타도 딕발라야디 다가라나 삼샤기 말했어. 이 중공도 지어랬어. 당보 건조기 미머증면에 포냐로 들으랬어. 건조기다 사마이도 있어. 사마이도요. 건조기 쇼바에 줘도 지금. 진짜트레스. 진짜트레는 좀 봐니 콘솔라 랑다랑주기 디 라마디어스. 수수 가르치니 되나요? 랑다랑주 라마디어스. free will like 지는. 어디 요레스. 아니 갑자기 좀 봐니 텐데기 포냐라고 지기 군조라야 먹어치스. 디 벌써 먹어치스. 대마타도 있는 군조기 디 랑다랑주 지기 누버디어라. 야고미 누름데어라. 아니 미스인도 좀 봐니. 디바 당보다 다 디르스다.
먹어치라.
어디 먹어치해줘라.
먹어치니 코랑
디바다 디 말해 거의 먹어치어기 자주 디코랑이라. 디코랑다 디바 당보다 쓰기였어. 디바기 중공지어라. 오리지널이라. 디바 당슈티 어디 쓰기였어.
근데 미저는 정말 콜라 미스죠 리젠로 메미치. 라 사미기 담문하래 먹어치.
말해 포냐디기 먹어치라.
아니 미기 넘어치.
미말다고. 당당한서 미말 포냐레디 하마이리로.
하마이기 먹어치네. 미츠랑 디제스요.
So then Geshe-ma is asking, in that act of rebellion of Lucifer against God, then how did all the human beings become sinners?
They choose. They have free will too.
They choose?
Yeah, they have free will. This is the doctrine. Because of
Wait, then doesn't the story go like Adam and Eve ate an apple?
And they chose.
That was the original sin?
In Judaism, there is no concept of Satan and hell.
Okay.
It doesn't exist in Judaism. Christians invented it.
Okay.
But there is, yes, the first sin with Adam and Eve. That is that. But God created people and to have free will. So they do bad actions, but they're not. But this is maybe similar to Buddhism. They're not inherently bad. They just choose every time to, bad actions.
Okay. Please. Yes.
Yes, Adam and Eve also just chose. Adam and Eve also just chose.
Choice so similar to Lucifer. Tadi jigbaras tene tambo ponya digi digba tambo de chegas. Di jela ni mitunis milaya randaran jugi nuba de teres kunjugi. Mi tambo poji da moji Adam da Eve da chituna. De kola ya nuba da ran teres. Ani inaya kunjugi chia da vejura. Di machi kunjugi machia da cheshada. Kushuroji sa la chumjuru. Kushudi masa ala bsta. Kushudi sashara kunjugi. Kushu sane da kunzu mosachi yaro. Dero charis. Dine digba de chumurda. Ni ta yahudi rishuna lamna nyala da layu de shigyo maris yahudi rishungi. Yahudi rishungi chela ini ishu de zugi nyala da layu la de sujures. 아니 미드조 텐직 비호랑 뭐 그런 미 제마타도 뭐 그런 비과 진리가 되랬다 이 말이었어.
I think the problem for a lot of people that, I grew up in a religious Jewish family, and I do not believe, and I step back from it, because if God invented us to have free will, but He's mad at us all the time, so like, what's the point? Every story in the Bible, God is furious, God is angry, so He has, this and that, and all those punishments. So to me, it does not make sense at all. And obviously to a lot of people. I'm sure some people have a better explanation of all this idea.
네 그런 게 들라이다. 그런 지적이 있던 녹적이 된다. 여호대 이슈기 리숑들이나라 줄루드는 사르좀이가 나라 강이 지슈 가려를 나스라. 군족이 먼저 트레스라. 아니 군다 먼저 디바 진지를 따기레스라. 디따연즈만이 계속 군족이 먼저 트나스라. 아니 먼저도 가도 있는 군족 먼저도 초대기로. 콩로사대지로지 넘버 장장 레스라. 가르치나의 군족이 초대기로. 디제산이 디 최대를 시라디 매바치기 메도스. 이나 미 최대를 켈링이 드서도 그런 소리 드시지 자야지라서 이네 나랑나 된 레스스면서 보시다 메도스 디게제데. 이 미망고지를 가냐 다랑 책이었어. 가도 있는 군족이 있다 밀어 초대기로 콩로사대지로지.
In Christianity?
이슈기에 바라바라 지가 되죠.
바이블
바라바라 로니에 로는 나는 어떻게 상관으로 근데 나중에 보도 기회를.
So have you read the Bible, the Torah?
Torah? Yes.
건조 있는 토라라 이라.
따라.
여호대나 토라, 아니 이슈나 Bible. So maybe there are good advices in the Bible. It's not. Yes.
Very good. I mean, the Ten Commandments, for example, 5 of them is don't murder, like no killing, no stealing, no lying, all of that. So it is in a way. I mean, I think all religion come, also to help and give, good. What's the word? Good, social rules, right? But so this is 5, and 5 others is, basically believe in God, pray for me. Sorry, I don't know them in English. I know them only in English.
I'm saying that I think the standout part is like there is an element of grace in Abrahamic religion. There is a God's grace, like God's grace can redeem you, and this grace, the element. What
In Christianity, this is so much emphasized.
Yeah.
God is love.
God
God
will
is
glorify you.
That's the
one more important. Jesus not only that loves us, He only loves us so much that He gave His life for us. And there we have Mary, which is which is the female principle, which is also very very important. Like Tara is kind of, and there is Holy Spirit, which is non-material, so there is a little bit more subtle element. So there is a lot of love.
네 요르스티다 아니 건조 있는 토라 아니 이슈 있는 바이블 디나 랍자다 할려와 사보든데 야보든데 요르스 아니 페나차샤나 토라 나오다 맞아 미기와 맞아 있는 미기와 주라 건조를 딘데다오지 10 commandments 아니라 주의 소주미로를 주의심으로 좀 미로를 해로든지 고마자베르도 다고도 왔어 아니 딘데 요르스라 아니 마타나 아니 건조 how would you say grace in Tibetan? The closest I can think is chinap. This is difficult to translate.
Is it also compassion?
Huh?
Could it be equated to compassion?
I wouldn't say it's compassion. I think it's a bit patronizing.
Yeah.
Grace compared to versus compassion.
Some bliss?
Blessings?
No.
Not blessings?
Loving forgiveness, kind of.
It's more sympathy when you look a little bit down at someone.
Sympathetic love.
Not down. Grace, right?
Loving sympathy.
Loving sympathy.
이제
다 건조기 나오는 따와 개체셔지어라. Grace level 지셔이르스. Grace는 밀라다 참박이 나와라 따야지어라. So looking at people with love, that's grace.
But also knowing
But-
that inferior.
Yeah, but also with like
There's
love and
hierarchy.
pityness. It's like they're a bit silly, so
Tini chambagi chadelasra, idila akha lecha, ko tapchua la lecha, tindegi chachi yores. Oti ta dini sundegi tindi chik chamba le peke chambutsi yores konzagi, kunjogi chamba le ro. Ani mimi lo pasu chamba le ro. Ti pe che chambutsi yores. Pena chashana ani nanzogi Jesus le jira. Jesus le di pe chamba chambores, tsewa chambores. 거기 미상하게 디바치도 그러나 소리 나왔어. 대나시 메리라네. 네 저기 지면지스. 지면대야 양 학배 짜지 무슨 그래서 잡아지 무슨 그래서. 근데 요르스 달랍자 내endo 있나?
Super Hindu.
So 예직남나라. So I used to read this book by Thomas Merton. So I think it's good to read that kind of text since you have come into touch with Buddhism. So Thomas Merton actually met with many Buddhist masters, and one of the most interesting masters he met was Chadel Rinpoche. Chadel Rinpoche, who was a spiritual adept who used to kind of meditate in the jungles. So he was a yogi, and they had like very interesting conversations. So I think this is a good book to read if you want to like.
what's the name of it?
Thomas Merton.
인지도에.
비비나라 에마이 타디 직주나야 보여지. He's I think a priest from I don't know where. US, right? Yeah.
I believe that every single religion could be either used for good or abused, and just narrow it to.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
It was before Buddhism, no?
What?
Christianity, the Abrahamic religion was. The Buddhism is the newest in the field.
No, Christianity is. Judaism is like about 500.
No, yeah, I know. Judaism and Christianity and Islam and Buddhism, like in that time linear, like.
No, Buddhism is 2,600 years.
Yeah.
Christianity is only 2,024 years.
Now the question is, when was Jesus born?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Buddha was born 500 BCE.
Yeah.
And when was Jesus born?
So he was 500 years before Jesus.
No.
Buddha.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yes. And
Actually,
there is
people
many arguments that say it should be even older than that.
Yeah. And some people say that Jesus actually came to India and studied Buddhism. Buddhism. So, and
Kunzu
Hinduism.
samba
is
na
also-
chidi chue sarpa doji lo munzi chigdo. Dimara kunzu ki tumba Jesus ma chung mundu ni sanji chungdi ni ngam che sungi ni yudere. Chue sung sangma chira.
Islam is later.
Yes, it's probably the youngest.
And the thing about Christianity is that you've got the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they were written well after Christ was born. And you've got the three. I mean, there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're the first three disciples, and they all have different variations of the same story. So I just find that
That's the New Testament, not the Old one.
yes, the New Testament, the New Testament where they actually talk about the life of Christ, and is that it's not reliable. That they are people's opinions of what they thought happened at the time. Unlike Buddhism, where they had Ananda, who he was given the responsibility of taking down the Buddha's words. So I just find the lineage of Buddhism far more what's the word I'm looking for?
Pristine, authentic.
Yeah. Far more reliable, far more authentic than Christianity.
Well, Jesus never meant to create a new religion, to be honest.
So
Jesus never meant to create a new religion. Nowhere it was created 200 years after he passed.
yes. I mean that in itself, it's
So it's Buddha. Right. So it's Buddha, right? So
I think that at the very beginning, he knew,
Now it's going off topic a little bit. Okay, let's bring this back. I'll translate that to Geshimara. Tini ani morangi lamna ani tenjujiyorada koranso. Tenjudila ni cha shaba cha ma shala idila ni nangshugi tenjida zo tits kongdawa longtena ya tenai te juro shtongodos. Kunzo tomba yishugi tenjuda zo ina ni tomba koranso ki tomba di chongnera ni michigi tisha juro jiresra. Kunzo New Testament, Old Testament and share tenju sarba tenju ningbalane. Ni yishugi chölawe de ni yishu korang Jesus korang gi ni chöjik sawa sugi lan sojoji mares. Koshine ni lo nijas jila mikashigi chöjik sojores. Cheza ni pigi tenju de korang temboji yo mare lagida ani dilana. Migi samzuro da mambuji tisha yalata pigina. Nangshuna dana nganzo kungawa koda tembaji yame juroji che. Nishigu tsangma temba sude jira. Koeda tsangi lungta temba di tsangma ma papshar pera.
디지 양저기 까도 뭐 보지나 까도는 사제기 신슈 가서 개발 뭐 보져라 달래 뭐 보져라 우리가 그래서 신이 배운다 양저기 사제기 배도 우리가 저기 리코드 양살래라 아니 그건 개발도 같이 신이도 참만년도 신 네발 테우스 양참만 되기도 다마 참만 맞다
Temba sumsi
근데 제 뜻이 비다로 스통다 얘네 먼저 나빠 야가를 아니면 지단 지단으로 야고를 스통인데
다 대선 peer review ina jiglada da thagaran isar. So ganzo zomjoro jitana sosorangi tigyo de lamsan pensho jo minda kebalo late soso dawala temuda tidawara.
니만 늘려다 남 시스다 건 되게 다가지 남들도 아니 티 아니 따지제도 야구 말에는 칭하면 땅색이다. 그리고 제자 진주도 빼고 지기서.
So then yes when we say that the way that the Buddha's teachings survive, then a lot of effort went into it. Actually, like in modern days, we will call it peer review before you begin to publish it. They had that like strict peer review system back in the day, wherein like it was just not once. When Kungawa and all these masters who were alive at the time of the Buddha got together to systemize the teachings, then they had the first assembly, the second assembly, the third assembly. Only then it was systemized in script. So when we're talking about like the Pramana-Vadikara, these kind of texts, then if they used to do like ask each other to review it, these learned masters, and if they do not, if a particular text do not meet the standard, then it is said that they used to tie it to a dog's tail, send it away. So yeah, it was very strict. So this is not to say that the Buddhist approach is the best, but it survives and it's authentic because of that stress.
딱 아니면 들이 줄을 잡을 되고라. 먼저 파츠 시에 뺏기 참버라. 제 디선 잠리가라 참만 감수 잠리가라 다 먼저 동지 제제는 가르치거라. 참만년도 신대로 파츠 시에 참버래. 아니 교들이 야가래 미에도 두어래 안데 마인게 럽자 가래는 먼저 랜 계셔라. 그러나 페로찬 상하잖아 칼라타 머리 디나로 수도 가르가 수도 가르펜 딜레어라. 디나시 칼라차마 사고에 잡아요라. 수수부라 같이 디나시 알아서 주만 보지다 이슈까지 힌두 세계 안에 대한 다 마음으로 넘어가려. 디나 수수만 알아서 럽자 제배 계셔 파절로 라 남백이 나로에는 좋다다 말에 참말로 아니 간저 로네 아니 수수 가르로 대바 되냐스라니 아시더라.
So then with this discussion that we had, now we have a better understanding of each other's cultural as well as spiritual backgrounds. So then it's important to have this kind of discussions from time to time to open up our perspective to other points of view. And now it's important to do this, to have this kind of open approach to exchange ideas, to exchange that kind of understanding. And now, this is not to say that one form of approach is better, one form or one tradition is better than the other. All of the traditions have their own appeal to different people, have something to offer. So it's like going to a restaurant and looking at the buffet line. Like you pick what you want to eat, what meets your dietary requirements. So whatever appeals to you, you begin to. It's not necessary for you to fill your plate with every item. Pick what you want. So like that, you remember to try to see what makes sense for you. But it's important important to keep that choice of being open-minded.
I think, I think one thing that a lot of religions don't seem to answer, for example, we are here, it seems like we're studying like rules of engagement, right? We're almost stuck in this game-like situation where we have to perform certain virtues and stay away from non-virtuous acts. It's a rule book and guidelines, almost like a game, and navigating it and ultimately liberating ourselves from this game-like environment that we call samsara. I think what is missing is the question as to why this exists in the first place. It can feel kind of claustrophobic being here. I have to do certain things, make sacrifices, and if I don't follow the rules, I'm here for an eternity. And I don't think I would have chosen this if I had the choice. But besides that point, I think nobody answers the question as to why
it exists.
Why it exists in the first place.
Tani tada nganzo da chulung mambu chine na mashi indu zambani di chegore, di chemirumare, di pangore, di langore la shigeras. Ta nangju na ine thagada ore dos. Mi yo pangore, lomarama pangore, nyumung pangore, tini dezo ya langore. Tishi indura, tishi indu zambata chik chegore, pigi pigi chemarumare la ite da tsemu gi nambada uji dos. Ra, tsemu la ini di chena digiri. 팀기를 해도 직시해요. 디체인데 zamani 디체고를 피기 체고를 망고다 죽당로 저라 저거 죽당로도 망고 시행도 zamani 미참좀 무수도 차려 왔어. 라. 다 디나이 티와 레사디 가는데 기들나 계속 말하는 거 되고 연나스라. 망로 마롱말에 디니 두이 말았어. 니 마롱말 내가 중이 두이 말았어. 아니 가르치잖아요. 코로알에 당원이라. 코로와 중고액이 좀 생각을 가르쳤으라. 코로가 가르치면 코르게 그랬어. 계속 나랑 다랑 중에 되고 연나스라. 막 코알을 중이 두이 말았어. 코와 여고에 좀 생각을 가르쳤어.
화이고도 다만서 레레니시로. 레니고 과거 나베도 힘들다. 레레니. 제가 나베도 가서 레레니 뭐 뭐지 사이즈. 코알 건드미네 코고야. 라. 내가 다시 코티레 온다. 다디라가.
So then from the Buddhist perspective, it's simple because of karma and because of your afflictions. So then why do we keep accumulating karma, and why do afflictions keep arising in us? Then the question comes there. Then it's because we have self-grasping. We grasp at ourselves. Even when you ask the question, why am I here? Then there's that grasping at the I. So it's because of that self-grasping we continue to exist and take birth in samsara again and again. So then it makes sense, if this is the reason why we keep taking birth in samsaric existence, then it makes sense to do whatever we can to get rid of this self-grasping. And if we get rid of this self-grasping, then we cut the root of accumulating karma, and then we cut the root of our afflictions, then we become liberated from samsara itself, like the Buddhas themselves.
Enlightenment.
So when we think about liberation, enlightenment, then we feel like these are things outside of our existence and outside of our reality. Wherein, like, it's in the mind. The mind becomes enlightened. So when the mind becomes enlightened, then there's no problem with apparent reality at all. So this is the kind of misconception we have when we think about enlightenment, something that is outside of existence or reality, when in a sense, it's the mind that becomes enlightened. So then it relates differently to the way that we normally do to apparent reality. So there's no resistance, no problem, no grasping, no reification, no superimposition.
Is this like realizing our true nature?
So then also, not exactly in those words.
Something what is exactly inside of us, but we forgot it
Yes,
because of
realizing the
karma.
true nature of the mind.
Mind.
Okay. Lo yene rangshingda karlaur. Wesewadida nyamsu yona sangjewarasta.
I just think the true nature of our mind, that when Buddhists teach, you this is concept of mind again and again and again, and people think mind is this. You know, us Westerners, mind is this. So that when you talk about mind so regularly like that, you're not talking about mental consciousness. And I don't think that point is clarified enough, you know, that differentiation, because, you know, mind is not this. Mind is mental continuum. It's something else, completely different.
저기 로 셈 시에발라니 시게르스 나중에 근데 마팅도 좀 많이 군수 지지와라스 군수기 로 셈 시에발라도 좀 남상 레버들 상당히 거다스 디마라스 아니 딜라만 저기 파세부지네 라기메두스 일라브라스 시 만저기 만남 주팅도 좀 봐. 셈라도 좀 만저기 이지셔봐. 라 이게 넘버 셔봐. 아니 이게 넘버 셔봐 디기 주 드조 데레지를 샤게르스 셈라도 좀 봐. 레버기 칠레로 오지 말아왔어. 네가 저기 타직도 세볼라고 이렇게 전부도스.
내가 저 로리가 남자 거라고 해요라. 로리 남자 로리다 로 senjung 중 아치라 수페베드 테스트. 스타윈 베 테스트여.
So then if we are really interested in how the Buddhists view the mind, then there is a separate text called Lorik, Awareness and Knowledge. And in this it talks about the main mind, the ever-present minds, the mental factors. It's very detailed.
Yeah, and
Awareness, Lorik, L-O-R-I-G. Lo meaning mind, Rik meaning to perceive or to be aware.
so know is different to mental consciousness.
You use these words interchangeably in different contexts because in different contexts the mind functions differently. Lo rikwa sheba la edo tunjimingi namtara. Kabab shindala.
senjung 중 아니래라. 센조센다 아니 senjung에 상마일. 라. 지다가서 다소가 맞다는 거 지금도 싸우는 거 때문에 제가서 이제 까끔마다 지나 양수가 까다 가리고 상황 참아 샤를 들어. 내가 그 실신 내가 제대로 뭐 나도 무슨 데 테스트해야 봐.
So it's very detailed. The study of the mind in Buddhism is very, very detailed. When we look at the 5 great treatises, then the exposition on the way the mind works and the different mental factors, the main minds, then how they engage their objects. It's very detailed. So if you are really interested, you should study these texts.
그는 나중에 더 나도 가래라나 나중에 배 타고 있나라 타고 나서 배래라나 뒤라라 잡고 봐 디타니 되듯이 아니 로이로다 그래 참아잡아 이니 딱이를 딱 진짜 리듬 그 딱을 세우고 봐 단단히 집어라 그래 나도 리듬감 딱 진짜감 봐다 파신데 계속 가지고 가서 조이 봐 티르라 다 오마라디가네 다다 우메이다 돈이 거시도 라 티 거시 되게 노아라디가 게 계속 동보다 다행히 너무 상황 노아네 봐 이거를
근데 뭐 주라마도 슬리퍼.
저라마 하더니 그리고 지금 배치만 메시가 달라붙는데 제만 살아요.
So if you really want to study, then your whole life you can dedicate it towards the study of the Buddha's teachings. And in the way that we are traditionally trained to give you a foundational basis, you are first trained in the Riglambra Duda, what is called the collected topics. This is the path of reasoning. So then you are introduced to the terms definition of the terms and the kind of reason why they are called so. Then you are taught about the mind and awareness, and then he talks about the different mental factors. Then you are taught the signs and reasonings called tagrik, how you begin to use correct sequences of reasoning, logic, to come to a conclusion. And then you study the pramana vadikara, the valid cognitions. What is valid? Pramana valid cognitions. What is a valid cognition? And then you begin to engage in dialectics, debate at that point. And then you study what we call the great perfections. And then you study the Vinaya, which is the code of conduct. And then from there on you graduate, only then you graduate through the study of Tantra.
Yeah.
So you can spend your whole life studying these things. Then there are texts like the Abhidharma Kosha, the Manifest Treasury of Knowledge, which kind of explains the Buddhist way of cosmology, how the universe came to be, everything. So even if I've spent 20-something odd years studying, I still feel like I have a lot more to study. So you immediately saying that this does not make sense, it's difficult, it's not the approach. We need to really keep studying. So then one is, after you complete this traditional course of study, 20 odd years, then one is advised not to become too dogmatic. Then one is advised to now study other forms of traditions, what are the points of views of other religious traditions, in order to gain a better perspective of the world. So then if the teachings of other traditions appeal to you, then you can also cultivate these teachings within your practice too. And if you do not like them, then do not begin to create a conflict out of a dogmatic issue, being so dogmatic. Just leave it. It has its appeal to other people. You do not need to practice it. Lasso, tini, lunch.